August 1944. Northern France, somewhere south of the Seine. Inside an American First Army interrogation tent, a captured German staff officer sits across from an American captain. Standard procedure: name, unit, last orders received. He answers precisely what the Geneva Convention requires and nothing more. Then the captain unrolls a map across the table. The officer goes silent, completely silent. He is staring at a map of the village he has personally spent 4 months defending. American forces entered that village only yesterday, but the map shows everything. The anti-tank ditch his men dug in May. The ammunition dump concealed beneath a railway embankment. The machine gun nest positioned in the second-story window of the schoolhouse. A fuel cache hidden under tarpaulin and cut brush. The exact location the company kitchen moved to last week, an order he gave personally. He has never seen a German map this detailed of his own position. And the Americans, as far as he knows, have never set foot in the village at all. This was not a one-time event. Across Europe, North Africa, the Pacific, captured German officers reported the same experience over and over. The Americans arrived carrying maps that, by every conventional military logic, should not have existed. Maps so precise that prisoners routinely assumed a traitor inside German high command must have produced them. When pressed for an explanation, experienced officers who had trained at the finest military academies on the continent kept reaching for the same German word, Rätselhaft. Baffling, not merely hard to explain, genuinely outside the boundaries of anything their professional training equipped them to comprehend. To understand why, you need to go back 8 years before that interrogation tent. Not to D-Day, not to the founding of the Army Map Service, to a small office in Berlin in 1936, and to a single bureaucratic decision that would quietly determine the cartographic outcome of the entire war before the first shot was ever fired. In 1936, the German government created the Reichsamt für Landesaufnahme, a unified national mapping authority. The stated purpose was simple enough: standardized German cartography. Individual states had been producing their own maps, using their own symbols, scales, and coordinate systems for decades. The new office would fix the fragmentation. But buried in the founding decree sat one phrase that changed everything. The mapping function would be placed directly under military authority. Consider what that meant in practice. In Germany, maps became classified material. A civilian who wanted to make one needed formal authorization. A geographer, hoping to conduct field research abroad, needed security clearance. Military attachés stationed in foreign capitals were tasked with covertly purchasing ordinary tourist guidebooks and shipping them back to Berlin in diplomatic pouches. Buying an Atlas of Tuscany was treated, quite literally, as espionage. Now consider what was happening simultaneously across the Atlantic. In the United States of the 1930s, maps were not a state secret. They were a commodity. The U.S. Geological Survey printed detailed topographic sheets and sold them to anyone who walked in the door for 30 cents apiece. National Geographic employed dozens of cartographers and published atlases available at any bookstore. University geography departments sent researchers abroad who brought data home in personal notebooks. Commercial firms produced detailed maps for railroads, oil companies, airlines. The Tennessee Valley Authority contracted civilian engineering outfits to map 7 entire states using a borrowed piece of German optical equipment. A German intelligence officer surveying this landscape saw chaos. No central authority, no security controls. Civilians wandering freely with cameras and field notebooks, producing maps anyone could buy off a shelf. To German institutional thinking, this looked like the absence of a serious national cartographic capability. It was, in fact, an entirely different kind of system, one built almost entirely by commercial accident across 50 years of ordinary civilian activity. Something no government on Earth could have constructed deliberately. And it was about to become the most formidable mapping operation in human history. When war came, the United States discovered it already possessed something Germany could not match at any price. Tens of thousands of civilians who already knew how to read an aerial photograph. university departments already full of researchers with doctoral theses on foreign topography, an entire commercial printing industry that understood at scale how to produce and distribute hundreds of thousands of printed sheets every week. In 1942, this scattered civilian expertise was pulled together under a single new agency, the Army Map Service. Its founding instructions would have baffled any German general who read them. Build the workforce primarily from civilians, women especially, since most draft-age men were already called up or soon would be. Hire them, train them in 8 weeks, put them at drafting tables 12 hours a day. The headquarters rose at Brookmont, Maryland, 4 miles northwest of Washington. By mid-war, it housed thousands of working cartographers. The overwhelming majority were women in their 20s, former school teachers, librarians, secretaries, recent graduates who months earlier had been studying fine art or English literature. They called themselves the Military Mapping Maidens. 8 weeks of formal training. 6 months later, the maps coming off their drafting tables were in the hands of infantrymen fighting on 3 continents. When captured German officers were asked in 1945 what they imagined the American mapping operation looked like, they almost universally guessed some version of a secret command center, an elite unit of military cartographers, probably hidden deep in the American interior. They were wrong on every count. There was no elite unit. There was a large building full of 23-year-old former librarians who had learned cartography in 2 months. But the cartographers at Brookmont were only producing the final printed product. The real question remained, where was the underlying data coming from? How were former art students drawing accurate maps of villages they had never visited, never read about, and likely couldn't have located on a blank globe? That answer required an entirely different category of soldier, one who never carried a rifle, never marched in formation, and never once saw the face of the man whose position he was helping to map. At Danesfield House, a Victorian mansion in the village of Medmenham on the Thames, the Allied Central Interpretation Unit processed an average of 25,000 photographic negatives every single day. By war's end, its accumulated library held over 5 million individual reconnaissance photographs, yielding more than 40,000 distinct intelligence reports. Analysts worked 12-hour shifts. Some specialized so narrowly that one person became the unit's recognized expert on railway marshalling yards alone, while another read nothing but coastal gun emplacements. The raw photographs arrived from unarmed reconnaissance aircraft, the F-5, a modified P-38 Lightning stripped of every weapon. No machine guns, no cannons, nothing for self-defense. Its entire armament consisted of 5 cameras mounted in the nose and belly. The pilot's sole job: fly level over enemy territory at 25,000 feet, trigger the cameras, and come home alive. The camera system these aircraft carried was called the trimetragon, 3 synchronized cameras firing simultaneously, 1 aimed straight down, 2 angled outward at 60 degrees. A single pass captured terrain from horizon to horizon. Multiply that across hundreds of aircraft and thousands of sorties across 4 years, and the result was a continuous photographic survey of entire continents without parallel anywhere on Earth. Those photographs then fed a machine almost nobody has heard of, the multiplex projector. In a darkened room, a stereoscopic image appeared to float in 3 dimensions above a white table. An operator wearing red and blue tinted glasses manipulated a floating cross with a control wheel. The instant the cross appeared to touch the ground surface, the operator recorded that elevation. Move the cross. Touch the ground. Record. Hour after hour. The topography of land thousands of miles away emerged 1 data point at a time. Here sits the irony that haunted post-war German interrogators. The multiplex projector was a German invention, developed by Carl Zeiss in the early 1930s. American engineers imported the technology by 1934. By 1938, the optics firm Bausch & Lomb was manufacturing American-built copies for ordinary commercial use. Multiplex stations already operated at the Geological Survey, at the TVA, at engineering schools nationwide. Germany, the machine's inventor, never built more than a handful of units across the entire war. Everyone locked under strict military control. The Americans took a German idea and distributed it across an entire civilian economy. But even this system had a limit. Aerial photographs, however detailed, cannot tell you what lies beneath the sand. And in autumn 1943, that problem threatened to destroy the entire invasion before it began. Allied geologists warned that sections of the proposed Normandy landing beaches might sit over unstable peat deposits. Peat does not support 30-ton tanks. If the assumption was wrong, the largest amphibious invasion in history would bog down in the surf on day one. Settling the question required someone to physically touch the beach, in the dark, under German observation. On New Year's Eve, 1943, 2 men swam ashore onto what would become Gold Beach. Major Logan Scott Bowden, 24, Royal Engineers, Sergeant Bruce Ogden Smith, 25. Dropped 300 meters offshore from a small craft, they swam in carrying soil augers and waterproof sample containers, working directly beneath German sentries patrolling above. They took core samples, measured exact gradients by hand, documented every visible obstacle, then swam back out. Surviving records show they returned to the Normandy coastline more than 30 separate times before D-Day, sometimes by submarine, sometimes simply swimming in alone carrying a waxed paper envelope wrapped around a sand sample, then swimming back under their own power. The results confirmed that sections of the beaches were indeed thin sand over soft peat. Allied engineers responded by developing bobbin tanks, vehicles that unrolled reinforced carpet across unstable ground so following armor could cross safely. Those sand samples, those gradient measurements, went directly into the maps American forces carried ashore on June 6, 1944. The German garrison at Omaha had built every one of those beach obstacles with their own hands. They watched their own beach every single day. They never once saw the 2 men who repeatedly swam through breaking surf in darkness to measure what they had built. By war's end, the Army Map Service had produced roughly 500 million individual printed sheets. For Normandy alone, 3,000 distinct map titles, 70 million sheets total. That works out to over 400 separate maps produced for every single soldier who set foot on the beaches that morning. Most of those soldiers never personally saw a single one. The maps existed for every specialist who needed to understand unfamiliar terrain before moving through it under fire. Staff officers, combat engineers, artillery observers, bridge builders, truck drivers, medics. Step back and see the full picture from a German general's perspective in 1945. Working from every captured American map, every interrogation report, every surviving member of Germany's own cartographic service, the logical conclusion was this: the Americans must have built a massive secret organization staffed by elite cartographers, supported by a spy network reaching into every European country, hidden so effectively that Reich intelligence missed it for years. That conclusion was wrong in every particular, and it was almost exactly what most captured officers actually believed. There was no secret to find. The system worked the way Henry Ford's assembly lines worked, coordinated labor by tens of thousands of ordinary people, each performing a narrowly defined task. Former librarians drawing contour lines, former art students tracing road networks, housewives in tinted glasses, extracting elevations from floating images of land they would never visit. The German officers had been trained to understand cartography as an art form practiced by a small number of specialists under tight central control. They could not perceive a system built on the opposite principle, deliberately decentralized, staffed by civilians, drawing openly on public sources, producing work in volumes measured in hundreds of millions. The finished map was the visible thing directly in front of them. The distributed network that produced it remained invisible, not because it was hidden, because it simply did not resemble anything their training had taught them to recognize. They kept searching for a single secret center that did not exist. The American system had something closer to 10,000 loosely connected centers. Brookmont was just where the printing presses happened to sit. There is a deeper truth buried inside this story, and it was never really about maps. The German officers in those interrogation rooms came from a tradition that treated expertise as inherently rare and properly kept under state authority. The Americans had built something that ran on the opposite principle, extending genuine trust to ordinary people for work that genuinely mattered. A former librarian trusted to learn cartography in 8 weeks and produce maps that infantry battalions would stake their lives on. A 23-year-old art student trusted alone at a drafting table to get the job done, day after day, unsupervised. The lesson embedded in those captured maps was never technological, it was civilizational, and it would take an entire post-war generation of German military historians to even begin articulating what their own predecessors had spent a whole war looking directly at, without ever managing to see.